My name is Alex Williams. I'm the Dean and Director of Animation and Visual Effects at Escape Studios. And I've got a wonderful panel here of escapees who are here to talk about teamwork and the importance of teamwork in industry. And we'll be talking about how teamwork works and how teamwork doesn't always work. As Jake says, we do lots and lots of teamwork at Escape Studios. And I think it's fair to say it's not always every student's favorite part of studying Escape. But it's teamwork is like broccoli. You might not like it, but it's definitely good for you. So just to introduce our panel, we have from left on our screen, we've got Stefano Ferron, who's an escapee, who's also the founder of his own VFX company, Storm Cloud, and also worked on a very successful group project. Actually, Tati, I think Stefano worked on Escape Studios. A very good film. We've also got Ricardo Ferreira, who's a senior compositor who's worked on some amazing films, Interstellar and Ex Machina, amongst other things. Worked at Prime Focus, MPC, and Double Negative. And we have Adam Dewhurst, who is an escapee and a VES Award nominee, who's been working lately at ILM on The Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings. So done some really amazing work there. And we've also got Harry Simmons, who's currently working at Vine FX. He's working as a runner, which is a tried and tested entry into the industry. So, and hoping to work as a compositor or a roto artist in 2D. And Harry also worked on a bunch of visual effects group projects at Escape Studios, in particular Outpatient and Dan's, one of which, I think a clip of which was actually in the little demo reel that we just saw. So great work there, Harry. So why don't we start with Adam? Why don't we start with you, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about teamwork. You know, teamwork, good and bad, on some of the projects that you've worked on.
Hello, thank you so much for starting with me. That was what I think everyone was dreading. Teamwork, good and bad. Yeah, well, I've worked on plenty of projects where teamwork has been a challenge, let's say, and it's been somewhat forced, and therefore, as a part of that, it just makes it that the job is less pleasant. And the truth of the matter is that half the time, I think bad teamwork just comes down to poor communication. I had a situation where I was, really butting heads with another guy. This is quite early in my career. This is when I first started in film. It was on the Golden Compass, and the guy who later on became a really good friend of mine, but he was coming from lighting. At the time, there was this real division between departments. So I was in modeling, and I just remember he kept asking for changes, and they were perfectly reasonable changes. But, I was new to the industry, and I thought I was somewhat infallible. And so everything I submitted, I was like, why? There's nothing wrong with it. Why are you making these changes? But they were perfectly reasonable. And it taught me a very good lesson later down the line upon reflection that, if communication's good, you're not gonna butt heads so much, but also that, everyone else is just trying to do their job. So it's not like a critique of what you've done. It's more to do with just getting to the end goal together as a team.
Adam, was that back at Cinesight on?
It was Framestore.
Oh, it was Framestore. Oh, yeah. So you were on Golden Compass at Framestore, not at?
I was, yes.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I was at Cinesight when Golden Compass was being done.
Yes, I actually did those two places back to back. So I would think I was there briefly while you were as well.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting that you say about butting heads, because it often you get into these conflict situations, and I think that it can feel tremendously important, especially if you believe that you're right, that you win the argument at the time. But as you say, you look back and you sometimes don't always know whether you were right after all.
Well, that is the power of hindsight. And I have a terrible compulsion in group meetings to make sure I get my opinion out. And I recently got some very good feedback saying, maybe just step back a bit, let everyone speak, because ultimately, it's all going to shake out anyway. You don't have to be heard in any given meeting or dailies or whatever. I mean, there's plenty of different ways to communicate. That's the other thing. You know, it's easy enough if someone's in the middle of presenting to just after the meeting, you know, approach them or send them a message and say, hey, I had an idea, maybe we could try this. So sometimes I think people stop at the first hurdle. You know, they didn't get a chance to speak up in dailies, or their email wasn't responded to, and they're just like, they get very stressed and very emotional about it. And the important thing is to take your personal sort of feelings out of it and just go, again, look, we're just trying to get to produce the best quality pictures we can, and people communicate in complete very different manners. And the sooner you sort of learn that, the easier it's going to be for you.
Do you think sometimes there's a problem that when you're on production and there's this pressure, these two competing goals of quantity and quality, where you've got someone saying go faster, and then you've got someone else saying make it better, and the deadlines are looming, and you can get into a stressful situation where maybe you've got someone who you think is actually stopping you from doing a really good job.
Oh,
and that can become a point of conflict.
That absolutely. That's especially when you're new to the industry and you're starting out, and you know, so yes, you often get pressure on top to produce iterations as quick as possible. And one of the other things that routinely happens is, you know, I'll produce something and then I'll have someone from another team who's been given the same pressure to produce their portion of this as quick as possible, and they're saying, hey, oh, well, thanks for delivering whatever you delivered. I mean, let's take modeling and say texture, for example. You know, I might quickly iterate a very quick series of versions of models, but that same texture artist I'm working with is also getting pressure to iterate textures, iterate look dev, and maybe my model has some errors in it. Now, I'm going to get very snappy and defensive as soon as someone from another team, not my superior, comes in and says, hey, I need some changes, because I'm already getting pressure from one area and I don't want it from another. But it's a really common pitfall to fall into. That person is not critiquing your work. They're just telling you, hey, I've got needs, and if you could help, that's gonna help me as well. So I think it's so easy to fall into this trap of just getting, you know, frustrated because you're getting requests from two different directions. But as I said earlier, it's not personal, and they're getting the same pressure you are. So if anything, you probably have some camaraderie there, really.
Yeah. Do you think part of the problem is working on these films that there can be an awful lot of chefs in the kitchen at times, and sometimes you don't really know who the head chef is, who's actually in charge of the thing.
I will tell you something really funny with the Golden Compass as a good example. For anyone who knows what the Golden Compass is, it's a sort of fantasy book by, is it Philip Pullman? And there are walking, talking armored polar bears in it. And we had to design a polar bear armored helmet. And I think the amount of designs I did was 44. And so by the end of it, I was completely exasperated. But I will tell you that at the end, every meeting I went into, they were talking about this bridge piece on the nose, and they kept saying a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. And I was getting drawings done on a napkin in biro that someone had done in a restaurant over lunch, going, here's your reference. And I was losing my absolute patience over it. And in the end, and this is not a lie, I resubmitted one of the very early ones just to go, there you go. And that's what they approved. And it was just so much bombardment of noise. And I think a lot of people felt compelled to have a view, have an opinion. Oh, I've just been brought in. Right, I think this, because if you're not speaking in a meeting that you've been brought to, a lot of people question their value. All right, if I haven't expressed myself, I don't have value. But you know, I think there's a pressure for that. But it's a very hard line to tread, I will say, when you're hearing all these voices, and it's important just to keep cool. You know, it's just a meeting.
Yeah. Ricardo, let's turn to you, because you've worked on some amazing films. Interstellar, absolutely spectacular film. Ex Machina, these are really, really great movies. And you've also got lots and lots of experience of teaching, and you've worked at many studios. What's been your experience of the challenges of teamwork, working in the industry?
Well, that's a tough one. So, in most of the cases, the big challenge, like Adam mentioned, is the lack of communication. So, normally, it depends of the level that you are working in terms of team working. Because if you are a junior, it's fine because you will have a lead that will guide you and help you, and you know that you are on the right path. But if you are a lead or a supervisor, then things are a little bit more tough, as Adam knows. And teamwork in these kind of companies, I normally used to say that we learn and growth with all the team all the time. So because we have challenges and we adapt to the crisis management, that is quite common, and we learn a lot in terms of problem solving, that we normally get with all these teams. um, it's good for the collaboration and be efficient, with these teams, but every company have these own problems. We would love to say that all these companies don't have any kind of teamwork problems, but we do. And each company have different ways of solving the problems.
What happens? How do you address the problem of conflicting notes? Because this does happen often, doesn't it? One person is saying make it blue, somebody else is saying make it green. You're feeling the pressure between these two different requests. How do you overcome those challenges on production?
Well, normally I always go to the soup. If I'm working as a senior, is if I'm the supervisor, I go to the head to solve these kind of problems. I know is not easy to deal, and for solve that problem, I normally do two versions, and then I send it to dailies. It's better.
Yes, multiple versions. I mean, that can be a challenge. I remember working at Cinesite. I'm not sure if you were there, Adam. It was on, I think it was on Marmaduke, and we had to fire off multiple versions for the client, and we had to work all weekend, and it was an extremely stressful situation. And the compositors had to work through the night on a Friday night, and then they had to work through the night on Saturday night as well. So they literally went for 48 hours without sleep, and that tested our teamwork to the limit. And in fact, the one animator who I remember who kept his cool throughout the entire process was Mark Stevenson, who's now head of animation at Escape Studios. And I will always be grateful to him for having kept his cool under extremely difficult circumstances. So he's perfect as the head of department at Cinesite at Escape. But what do you? I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, you're in these situations, and you're how do you cope with the pressure of competing requests from different departments?
Well, like Adam said, we get this small pressure in the beginning because we are already doing our job and someone is putting more pressure on it. And I think in general, I always learn on these big companies that we are a lot of artists to keep cool and chill. And when someone asks big changes on our work and do some pressure, we always should talk with the soup or the head to solve this situation. Because I already have many situations where I was doing my job. For example, I was comping CG, and then the 3D guy came to me and say, "Look, I have a new version for your work, and you need to change because this one is not approved, but you need to do work on this one." So I was working on this new version, and then the director said, "Look, who approved this? You need to go back to the other version because I didn't approve." So with this, I always rely on superiors when it is this kind of pressure or decisions, final decisions, because otherwise we are working a couple of hours almost for nothing. And if you don't keep cool and chill during your work, normally you used to say, when you are a senior, we put our headphones, we pick our mug with tea and just relax. That's what I do at some point. When I was a junior or a mid, I was always nervous and didn't know what to do. So I was relying on my colleagues on my side that have more experience and ask them about the decisions. But at some point of the career, you just need to take a talk with, normally we use Slack or other chat softwares inside the companies, and we just send a message, look, I have these requests, is putting some pressure, what normally inside this company you should do, because every company have its own way of working. For example, you talked about Ex Machina that I worked, and this they have a proper way of working in that time. For dailies, when we were working in a couple of shots, in dailies we were only the roto, prep and comp department in dailies. For example, at ILM is completely different. In that time, I was working in Avengers, and on dailies were only the people that work on that specific shot. So were the 3D guy, the matte painting guy, the comp, the tracking. So the specific departments only for that shot were there, and not everyone doing daily. So every company have its own ways to solve this pressure and solutions. And that's why we are always working in different companies and getting different experiences.
Yeah, interesting. Let's turn to some of my more recent escapees. Harry, you worked on 2 visual effects projects, Outpatient and Dan's. How did you feel like, I mean, you're now working at Vine. So did you feel like Escape Studios prepared you for industry? I mean, we do obviously try and make these group projects as industry realistic as we can. What was your working on those?
One of the examples actually I remember from my interview at Vine was saying that the nice thing of the team projects at Escape was that you could fail and you had this sort of safety net that it was just a university project. You know, it wasn't a feature film or the next big sort of #1 show on Netflix. So you were allowed to sort of experiment and try things and make mistakes and present, you know, 2, 3, 4 versions of something and have a lot more open discussions compared to, you know, now I've had sort of smaller tasks like comp tasks at Vine on shows. I remember particularly The Witcher was one where actually the client knew exactly what they wanted, and there wasn't an internal discussion. It was like, you get your brief from your supervisor, this was what you was expected, that's what you delivered. The shot then got approved and I never saw it again. Whereas obviously on the Escape project, where you know, you double up, and I'm sure Stefano remembers this, where you double up as like producers and directors, and you know, you literally see your whole project go from storyboard to final delivery. And actually your teamwork dynamic changes over that as well. You know, in the early pre-vising stage, it's very fun. Everyone's chucking ideas around. You kind of forget that you've got to deliver it in 6 weeks and that you're on a shoestring budget. And then by the end of it, it kind of echoes what you were saying about pulling sort of 2-day all-nighters just to get the thing out the door, and everyone's just patting each other on the back for making it to the end. So I think in that sense, the team projects definitely give you a bit of grit, and then they also show you the communication as well, which, yeah, like Ricardo and both Adam said, it underpins everything. Is the communications on Slack, the chats in the office, the daily sessions, like just having a record of everything and knowing who you need to go to if you're unsure. And yeah, particularly as someone who is significantly more junior, it's very important knowing where I need to go when I've got questions, and also just, you know, kind of being brave enough to just go, okay, I'm at that point with a shot or a task where I don't really know what I'm expected of here, and then just going to those people and ironing it out as soon as possible. Particularly production like it, when you say to them that you need a bit more time because they can adjust their schedules before it hits a roadblock. Or vice versa, their faces light up when you say, "Oh, I've done that 2 hours early," and then they give you another task that's just come in. So, yeah, I'd say in that regard, the Escape projects definitely, you know, teach you that speed and also just being honest with your teammates.
How did you deal with the problem? Because one of the problems we always have at Escape is the problem of free riders, which is to say, in a team of 6 or 7 students, you're always going to have at least one who basically just shows up at the end to collect the statue. How did you, and we obviously, we have a way of grading folks so that they don't get credit for that, and they can in fact fail the module altogether. But how did you deal with the ones who didn't perform?
Yeah, I mean, I started at Escape. My first year of Escape was in lockdown as well, so any team projects during lockdown was particularly even more challenging, because if someone didn't show up, they could be literally unreachable. They didn't have to log on to whatever portal we were using. They didn't have to communicate with the group. How our team particularly addressed it was we just tried to make sure conversations happened in an open environment, whether that be a group chat where everyone can see who reads it and who replies, and also just checking in with people privately. Like sometimes you don't know what's going on with, other students, particularly on courses. And same in the office. Like if you're unsure about the status of something from another department, like I can just walk over and ask, or I can just ask production for an update. So I think obviously since leaving Escape, I don't think I've ever encountered a free rider at Vine, which was one of the nicest things. One of the best bits of advice I ever got from an industry person whilst I was still on a team project was, at least after uni, you don't tend to bump into too many free riders anymore, because a lot of them sort of get whittled out at that stage. So
Yeah.
in one regard,
if someone's not contributing at all, they just
yeah, exactly. So
Mostly.
and I only, even at Escape, only experienced it 2 or 3 times, and I think in a way it brings the other teammates together, because you want to sort of step up and prove that your group of 4 or 5 delivered as much as the team that had 8 people all playing together. So in a way, it kind of brews healthy competition as well.
Yeah, well, we always struggle with that, with how big should the teams be, because bigger teams in theory produce better work, but that isn't actually always the case.
And also for myself, like I was interested in compositing on the course, and we were very few between. I think there maybe was 8 or 9 compositors, stretching that across 4 groups, and suddenly, your group wanted 12 shots comped, some groups had 6 shots, and you're like, okay, how do I do this?
Yes, and that is tough with compositing, because you're at the end of the production line and everybody else is late, and layout was late, and animation was late, and lighting was late, and then suddenly it all comes to you, and you're like,
I'm reliving it all already.
and then somebody says, "Oh, you've got a week." Yeah. Well, we do struggle to manage the pipeline on those sometimes. Stefano, let me ask you, because you've got a whole extra layer of teamwork issues because you've founded your own company. So how do you as a founder, how do you deal with the teamwork issues at Stormcloud?
Well, first of all, our company is still very, very, very small. We are in developing some new approach in the VFX industry. So we are trying to develop a new manner to create a visual effect directly on set. So our approach is very particular, and unfortunately it's very hard to having different people and with different skills, because everyone are specializing in a specific role, because what we are doing is very experimental. So our teamwork sometimes is very hard, because you need to coordinate people, and at the moment because we are still in developing stage, we don't have any funds. So sometimes it's very hard to push people when they are working basically for free, because it's still a very early stage. What I learned in my experience,
pre-revenue, as it were.
I'm sorry?
Your pre-revenue, as it were. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. We are in pre-revenue, yes. What I learned from Escape Studios is because I preferred working in production rather than compositing. I loved both, but definitely production was more for me, for myself, even though I did the master in compositing. But what I learned in Escape Studios is that often you need to push people, and probably even in DNEG or any other company, but you definitely need to inspire people and working on their own tasks, and try to make even better what they are achieving. So yeah, teamwork sometimes is very tough. It's very tough because people are like hard to inspire and push forward. So yeah.
But you were on Tatty at Escape, I think. And I mean,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
was a sweet film that came out quite well, I thought. How was the communication on that?
Tati was my first what I would say big project, because I was in the MA course, and the Tati was in undergraduate project, and I jump in literally in the last few weeks because they were very in rush, and they needed some extra help. So my tutor at that time introduced me to the group and asked me, "Would you like to join in an undergraduate project?" To be fair, has been probably my second best experience in Escape Studios, because I could work with so great talent. Some of them are at ILM right now, and was absolutely great to see how they were working together. I think that specific group, compared to many others, they were working very well together. They try to help each other a lot, and they spend many hours, even during the night, to achieve the project. And I remember especially two students, they spent like 2 days in a row, probably, like on Zoom, try to solve some problems. It was great. It was really great as a teamwork. Tati, even at the end, I remember when they screened the project, they were so happy, everybody together. Even though I jump in the last 2 weeks and 3 weeks probably, and was mad. It was a mad adventure, but it was definitely a great opportunity to work in a team.
No, but I mean,
So
that's good. I mean, that is, I suppose, how the group projects at Escape are supposed to work. Is if you need extra expertise in some area, that we can go out to different departments and
yes,
call people. Like, I mean, that when it's working well, that's what's going on.
yeah, exactly. Even though is true even the opposite. I mean, I had another big opportunity, a big challenge, sorry, at Escape Studios, my personal project in NMA, and I was struggling with some shots, and incredibly, one student, she was at the first year at the time, in the undergraduate, she jumped into the project, and she was one of the first to achieve most of the shots compared to people from the third year, and she did some great work, even though she learned so much by herself, because obviously in the first year they are not learning so much about compositing. They are more prep artists. So it was really, for myself, Escape Studios has been a very good challenge, to a very good opportunity, sorry, to understand the even who doesn't have so much experience can make the difference in a teamwork, because maybe they see everything just in an easy way. So they can say, well, if you do so, maybe it's just easier and you achieve exactly the same. So Escape Studios has been, yeah, a very, very good opportunity for myself as a producer or founder.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it. It worked out well. Did you feel that way, Harry? Did you feel like those projects, that people really stepped up to help on the ones that you were on, even under lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, one of the examples that comes to mind, actually, I think it might have been yourself that was submitting, I want to say, Dan's for the rookies or something, and you messaged me being like, why is your group nominated 2 people for producer? And I was like, because we just had like 2 people's worth of work, and someone had stepped up to just help, because I was originally sort of overseeing the production side of it.
Right.
And then Manny, one of the compositors from our team, stepped up to just help take on some of the load as well. And it was like, it's not fair to not give someone the credit, because actually you kind of relied on your teammates most when you're sort of down in the trenches per se with some of those projects. And actually, yeah, you get to step up and try other things as well when you do muck in like that. I didn't have situations like Stefano said, where pulling people from the groups, but I did see it happen, and it actually did save a lot of other groups, particularly with very like specialized skills. If a group needed someone who just knew Houdini inside and out, or was struggling with getting things to render properly, or optimizing renders, particularly from 3D, because compositors were running out of time to get final renders. And that just comes down to, people actually communicating with their friend groups and their peers and finding what they're all good at and going, hey, look, I haven't actually got someone in my team that's confident with this, but could you come and show us how to do it? And then just, spending an afternoon with someone, suddenly you get their project turned back around and they're all happy and everything's running on track again. So it takes very little effort in that sense to help your teammates out. You just have to be willing to do it. And like Stefano said, you don't have to be the best technically, but you might just have another idea that other people haven't thought of because they've been staring at the same thing for, the last week and they can't see it from another angle.
Yes, yes. I mean, and maybe that. I mean, we had a producer come in, George Caton Coult, I think is his name, who did Pop Paper City down in Bournemouth, and they hired something like a dozen escapees for that show. And he came back and basically gave this speech saying, "I love Escape Studios graduates because you guys already know how to work in teams." And it was such a lovely thing to hear because we're always, the tutors at Escape, we're always banging on about the importance of teamwork, but we sometimes feel like we're we're telling you guys stuff you don't want to hear. So it was so great to hear him come back and say we love escapees because they already have this experience of working together, and know how to do it. And Katrine, yes, we've still got time for a few more stories, and I think then we'll take some questions. I think we should hear some horror stories now. I think we should hear some really awful stories of teamwork gone horribly wrong. So I think, Adam, you had a story about a fish?
Yeah, I mean, so we've all talked about very practical parts of teamwork, but I think teamwork extends beyond the work you're doing to just getting on with people that you cohabit an office with. And certainly, recently, very sad yesterday to discover that the mill was closing down. Some of my fondest memories of working at the Mill London and the Mill New York. And we had a very, very tightly knit asset team there. So we would do modeling night out and stuff like that. We did D&D. We did a lot of group activities. And there was one guy that was not shunned, so to speak, but he was very hard to incorporate, but he made it hard for himself. He would do, this is the example I gave earlier, he would, bring in his own lunch, that's fine. Obviously everyone's under different cost constraints, but he would bring in salmon and cook it in the office. And it just had an unholy smell that permeated for more, several days. And slightly unfairly, he then became known by the office, not our team per se, but as Salmon Guy. But it made he didn't make it easy to get on with him, So I think someone's put practice gratefulness. I think practice kindness is another one. It was a little mean at the time, but he didn't make it easy.
Did anyone say anything about the salmon? I guess that's a bit of a challenge.
Well, I suppose that was the thing. We were all too polite.
Yeah.
It was just, behind his back kind of going, oh my God, he's cooked salmon. He was actually he was quite generous this time because here's the thing. It wasn't like he was a junior or new to the company. He was actually quite a senior and very talented artist. And so we all, I think because we had respect for his ability, no one said, listen, that salmon reached the high heaven. Could you maybe keep that at home also? But anyway, it's a good example for me of how a well-knit team is considerate of other people outside of just the actual work they're doing. It's also the cohabitation of the office space in particular.
Yes, and being considerate to the people you're working with. I remember a few years back at Escape, we had a student on the animation course who had really, really bad personal hygiene. And that was a real challenge. And I don't think anyone ever said anything, because I remember going in at some point to teach a class and saying to the tutor, I'm obviously not mentioning any names here, this is really bad. Don't you guys need to say something? And the tutor said, well, there's only 2 weeks to go. We've suffered this long.
A very British sensibility of like, no. God forbid. It's a good example of people don't want to approach conflict. Like conflict, right, as a soup and lead, I've had to approach conflict, and I think everyone absolutely hates it. No one wants to approach it. And I had a guy who was on my team who I'd hired, in fact. This is that same office. And he's sitting next to me, and we were on a job, and he was just taking longer than he needed to. And I would nudge him and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And he'd give me very short 1-2 word answers. And in the end, I said, "Listen, let's go get a coffee." And we went out, and I said, "What's going on? You're right." And he used to look. He said to me, "I'm really frustrated because I should be getting this quicker, and it's taking me ages." And he felt under pressure from some of the junior members who were performing really well on the team. And I said, "Okay, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It was mostly his perception." So I was able to calm him down, but just the fact that I'd raised it allowed him to sort of vent his frustration. And I think, being able to just, it wasn't like a conflict of telling someone off. It was just raising the question, "Are you okay? How's it going? I didn't even want to say you seem frustrated. I just wanted to ask him, are things okay?" And once he had that opportunity, he opened up, and we were able to come to an amicable solution.
So that's really interesting, because it sounds like what could have been perceived as somebody not wanting to do their job or being obstructive actually came from a place of vulnerability and anxiety.
And totally. And I was actually getting pressure from the show lead to say, "Hey, why is that asset not done?" And I was saying, "Hey, this guy's he'll do it." And I had faith in him. And that was born of the fact that we had this closely knit team. And I think that it wasn't a case of, I think a lot of people, when they get promoted to a sort of lead or super role, they think it means giving people orders and telling people what to do, and this needs to be done in team. And it's not. It's actually a very empathetic role. You really have to understand who you're working with and what their needs are. And I knew this guy, he was quite emotional, and he was very perceptive to what was going on, and he was just felt under pressure. And actually we really enjoyed we really embraced that environment. Enjoyed's the wrong word. Embraced the environment of having pressure from below, like having junior artists come in and say, produce such good work that the seniors are like, "Oh wow, I got to up my game." What a wonderful environment to be in, because suddenly everyone's like looking to sort of showcase what they can do. So we really tried to nurture that. But in this particular case, we had to tell this guy, provide him a way to relax and unwind and speak his piece. And as soon as he could do that, everything calmed down. He was able to deliver on time, and it worked out well. But it comes back to the first point we made in this whole talk. Communication is key.
Yeah, and I think one bit of teamwork that we haven't really talked about, but which I've found really important, is that, if you work with people and you get along well with them, then they will bring you back for other productions. Because as we know, there are no jobs for life in this industry. A 2 or 3 or I think the longest contract I ever had was at DreamWorks for about 4 years. And that, that was pretty long by industry standards, but we tend to be project to project. So you end up working with the same people, not necessarily for the same company. But I was probably in the same building as you, Adam, at Cinesight on something, and also possibly with you, Ricardo, because I can see Cinesight's on your CV as well.
Yes.
So we all kind of end up working with the same people. I'm currently working with a director who I first worked with back in 1996, who I love working with, and those working relationships can really sustain you over long periods. Right, I want another horror story, a group. What about Ricardo? Have you got any group horror stories you can give us?
Well, my stories don't have salmon, but
no salmon.
that story wins for sure. But I always have problems in terms of teamwork when it comes to put seniors working any shots of rotoscoping. So it's quite common on the teams that in the beginning of the work, when especially you are lead or soup, that everyone helps doing the job. So in that time, in that company, I have 8 senior artists, including me, and I divided the work. So what happened here is that everyone wants to jump one of the most important challenges in compositing, which is learning properly rotoscoping. And in that time, and I'm sure that Stefan and also Harry, I already saw some of their work and they know how to do it properly. They divided everything in shapes. They divide the heads, the arms, the torso, and then they track it properly. What the seniors in that time, and even now, they are used to do is one single shape, and then they go and just try to move on all the shapes. So,
Especially, sorry to interrupt you, Ricardo, but
yeah.
especially because you teach me some technique. You don't remember myself, but I perfectly remember you when you show me how to do properly rotoscoping.
No,
Sorry.
you are too kind, man. You are too kind. I have also a good school at Escape Studios, and also double negative was really important for me because they have a really good pipeline in terms of rotoscoping. But thank you, Stefan, for remember. But I see you're so real, guys, and you do it properly. So you divide everything in shapes. And the horror in terms of companies is that seniors they don't want to do roto and prep. They want to jump directly to compositing and comp CG. So I was trying to teach them how to separate everything in shapes. And when someone have more CV than you and you are teaching these guys how to do it properly, it becomes a problem of egos. And for me, this is the horror because I was almost doing their jobs at some point, and I asked for junior people to do the job because the senior didn't want to do. So it's really tough and hard at some point, this teamwork, because the mentality of some artists is really hard to deal.